5 million. That is the number of positive coronavirus cases, people who have tested positive here in this country. This is since the beginning of this pandemic, at the beginning of the year. That number represents more than a quarter of the total number of coronavirus infections globally. And of those infected in the U.S., close to 163,000 have lost their lives to the virus. Meanwhile, over the weekend, President Trump signed a series of executive actions related to the pandemic's economic fallout. But these measures drew criticism from Democrats and some Republicans on Capitol Hill, where talks over another stimulus package are at a stalemate. While speaking to reporters at his New Jersey golf club Saturday, President Trump repeated misleading claims that his administration passed a law surrounding veterans' health care known as Veterans' Choice. That legislation was actually signed by President Barack Obama in 2014. Mr. Trump signed a measure in 2018 that expanded the program. So our Paula Reed asked the president about why he's focusing on the act.
Go ahead, please, right here.
President, why do you keep saying that you passed Veterans' Choice?
Please.
You said that you passed Veterans' Choice. It was passed in 2014.
Okay, excuse me. Go ahead, please.
But it was a false statement, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much.
All right, didn't look like he wanted to answer that question. That was just a snippet of all the activities surrounding the president over the weekend because he was pretty busy. Let us bring in Ben Tracy to talk more about what the president has been saying and doing this past weekend. And of course, Ben, you're at the White House, and I want to start with these executive actions. I remember when they started sort of popping up on my screen, they were very wide-reaching, and I kept on thinking to myself, can he actually do that? Because it covered evictions, the payroll tax, extending unemployment, all these other things. So go through the list. What executive actions did he sign over the weekend?
So yeah, let's go through these one by one, and we should clarify what the president is claiming and then what we know to be true. So first, on eviction protections, the president says that he is protecting people from being evicted. But when you really look at the text of what he's proposing, this is simply directing federal agencies to look into whether or not it is necessary to protect people from eviction. That's a very different thing. The president talks about extending this new federal unemployment benefit to the tune of $400 per week. He made a big deal out of that, but that's actually a cut from the $600 weekly federal benefit that has been in place that expired at the end of last month. The Democrats want to keep it at $600. The president wants to cut it down to $400. In the small print there, also, the president calls on states to fund 25% of that benefit. So states have to come up with $100 of every $400. And we already heard some governors yesterday saying that's just not going to happen because so many states are facing severe budget shortfalls because of the pandemic. And then finally, the president wants to suspend the payroll tax until the end of the year for Americans that are making less than $100,000 per year. There's some real questions as to whether he can actually do that constitutionally. It also doesn't help people who are unemployed because if you're subject to the payroll tax, that means you're getting a paycheck. So this is widely seen as more of a help for some businesses than it actually is for Americans who are really hurting right now.
And you actually really quickly touched on something that I heard, a conversation that I heard happening almost immediately afterwards, which is the constitutionality of some of what he's proposing. Could he be facing some legal opposition here?
Yeah, that's the key question here, especially when it comes to the payroll tax. I mean, the Constitution's pretty clear that it gives Congress the right to decide on how federal taxpayer dollars are spent. And so kind of rewriting the tax code unilaterally has really never been done. So we'll see how this plays out. In terms of who would actually sue the administration, that could be Democrats in Congress trying to ask the courts to decide what is the constitutionality of all of this. You also could have a situation where on the eviction front, you could have banks perhaps sue the administration. They would have standing if they're being forced not to evict people who are not paying their mortgages or their rents. So we'll have to see how this plays out in the coming days. I think we also have to see if this is really just a negotiating ploy or if these are real plans that are going to be put in place. But the criticism is that this is not going to lead to real relief for Americans anytime soon.
Yeah, in fact, the president tweeted a little less than an hour ago. So now Schumer and Pelosi want to meet to make a deal. Amazing how it all works. And so, yeah, to your point, perhaps it was to kind of force the hands of Congress to get down and actually do the business that they seem to not be able to do. Last time we heard from Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, I believe they said that there were several $1 trillion apart from what the Republicans' plan was. And even though Pelosi said they were willing to cut $1 trillion out of their plan, it still leaves them with sort of a huge gap in between. So what is the status of these congressional negotiations?
Yeah, where I come from, $1 trillion is still a lot of money. So they'd have a big gap to try to bridge there, and it doesn't seem that the administration is willing to kind of meet them halfway on that. So we'll see where it goes. But the president is now, as you mentioned, intimating that what he has done has worked, has gotten the Democrats to want to come back to the table. He even said that Nancy Pelosi called. But our Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill is reporting that Schumer and Pelosi have not talked to the White House at all over the weekend. So that doesn't seem to be the case. They say they don't know what the president's actually talking about here. So this might be some positioning by the president. But at the end of the day, you have both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill saying there's going to have to be some legislation here, because even if what the president has done, let's just say it all works, it all goes through, it's all legal, which it probably isn't. But it doesn't include money for schools. It doesn't include money for states and local governments. It doesn't include the direct payments to families that a lot of people were expecting and that both sides seem to have agreed on, another round of $1,200 checks. So economists are saying that this is just not nearly enough. So at some point, it does seem both sides are going to have to get back in a room and figure out something.
Yeah, definitely. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about a new CBS News Battleground Tracker polling, specifically looking at Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So these are two states that really were pivotal when it came to the 2016 election in helping President Trump win. And those people in that state say that when they think about the election, what is more important to them than the economy is the handling of the pandemic. But the president seems to be focused primarily on the economy. He wants kids to get back to school. Why? Because parents can't go to work if their kids aren't in school. These executive orders or executive actions rather, were all in relation to propping up the economy, not about ending this pandemic. Why do you suppose the president is so focused on that?
I think the president believes that if the unemployment rate were to come down, if the economy is seen to be recovering strongly by the time of the election, that puts him in a much better position, and that's likely true. I think what you're seeing with voters, though, is voters increasingly believe that unless the virus is under control, there really isn't going to be a meaningful economic recovery. This is also a matter of people's health and a matter of life and death for a lot of people. So you can't really separate the virus from the economic implications. I think this is why, though, in the last couple of weeks, you've seen the president attempt this pivot where he is talking more about the virus. He's doing these, near daily briefings, press conferences, speeches, where he's no longer kind of pretending it's not happening, even though some of the things that he says is dubious at best. But you do see the president addressing this more, and I think that's because of some of this polling showing that increasingly Americans believe this is a real problem. It's not going away anytime soon. And unless the virus is under control, we're not going to have a meaningful economic recovery.
So listen, before I let you go, we got to ask you about one more topic that we've been trying to talk about sort of even last week, but we haven't got around to it with all this other really big news. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar is in Taiwan. He met with a Taiwanese president. This is pretty significant stuff. Tell us, what's the purpose of this visit and why it's so significant?
Yeah, this is a big deal. This is the highest level cabinet official to visit Taiwan since the U.S. and Taiwan broke off formal diplomatic relations back in 1979. Now, Azar says he's there really just to talk about coronavirus. He complimented Taiwan on its handling of the virus. They've had very few cases there. They've seemingly handled it very well. But this is obviously a signal to China. And China is not at all happy about this visit. China views Taiwan as part of its territory. It believes that it could take it back with force if need be. but increasingly you are seeing the administration try to find ways to kind of to annoy, frankly, Beijing and China. This comes at a time where you have the Chinese government now announcing sanctions on U.S. senators, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio. You have the administration just last week announcing sanctions on the chief executive of Hong Kong because of the new national security law there. So this visit by Secretary Azar is just one more escalation of this rapidly deteriorating relationship between the United States and China.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm sure China, like the rest of us, are going to be watching it pretty closely. Ben Tracy, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne Marie.